1974 was a year which was hallmarked by many striking images. It brought unprecedented constitutional and military changes. Fresh hopes for peace and democracy were tempered by terrorism and social upheaval. There were rapid changes in political fortunes. The Cold War went on, and natural and man-made disasters struck. Yet there were great advances in technology and fashion. It was a year of contrasting memories which have been preserved here in this series for all time. 1974 was a turbulent year for the United States and its President Richard Nixon. Abroad, he still seemed the darling of the crowds, but at home, the shadows of the Watergate affair closed in. His close aides had been implicated in approving the break-in at the Democratic Party headquarters. Now, a Senate committee was considering whether the president had been aware. If so, he could be impeached under Articles 1 and 4 of the Constitution.
Will be made to Judge Sirica, not to the Court of Appeals, for an additional stay pending the appeal.
The president claimed the transcripts of his conversations proved that he had been as surprised as anyone.
These transcripts show clearly that I first learned of it when Mr. Dean himself told me about it in this office on March 21st, some 6 months later. I probed, questioned, tried to learn all Mr. Dean knew about who was involved, what was involved. I asked more than 150 questions of Mr. Dean in the course of that conversation. He said to me, and I quote from the transcripts directly, "I can just tell from our conversation that these are things that you have no knowledge of."
The public was unconvinced.
After reading the edited transcripts released by the White House last week, I am writing to ask that you resign your office. The transcripts reveal a total disregard for the moral and ethical values upon which this nation was built. I am compelled to speak out. I cannot remain silent in the face of the now obvious moral corrosion destroying and debasing the presidency.
Steadily, the evidence mounted that the buck must stop at the top. Two of the president's closest aides, John Ehrlichman and John Dean, were tried and convicted. Senior members of the administration, like Henry Kissinger, who had not been involved, fought to remain untainted.
So I've put before you the facts as I know them. They are consistent with my testimony before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I do so not to maintain a position in the government, which I will not maintain for one day beyond the public confidence. I do so because simple fairness requires that either there be an exoneration or that there be a public accounting of those who engage in this defamation of character. I do not believe that it is possible to conduct the foreign policy of the United States under these circumstances when the character and credibility of the Secretary of State is at issue. And if it is not cleared up, I will resign.
Unrepentant to the end, but with impeachment looming, Nixon took the only step left open.
I have never been a quitter. To leave office before my term is completed is abhorrent to every instinct in my body. But as president, I must put the interests of America first. Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford, will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
The next day, he said goodbye.
Members of the cabinet, members of the White House staff, all of our friends here, you are here to say goodbye to us. And we don't have a good word for it in English. The best is au revoir. We'll see you again.
Just a few hours later, Gerald Ford was sworn in as president.
That I will faithfully execute.
That I will faithfully execute.
The office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
He promised a new style of leadership.
I believe that truth is the glue that holds government together. Not only our government, but civilization itself. That bond, though stained, is unbroken at home and abroad. In all my public and private acts as your president, I expect to follow my instincts of openness and candor with full confidence that honesty is always the best policy in the end.
Gerald Ford's first foreign trip as president was to meet the Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev in Vladivostok. At home, racial tensions simmered. In Boston, 3 school teachers refused to allow integration. In the end, a court insisted that black children be taken to school by bus with a police escort. Confrontation in the Middle East continued, with the Israelis threatened from all sides. In Sinai, there was at least agreement to set up a buffer zone, leaving Egypt in control of the Suez Canal.
We have just signed now the agreement of the disengagement of forces.
American Secretary of State Henry Kissinger worked tirelessly to bring peace to the area. His exhausting shuttle diplomacy included talks with other world leaders such as Britain's Sir Alec Douglas-Home and Lord Carrington. He made repeated visits to the Middle East to consult Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir and her cabinet. He also met Syria's President Assad. Amid all the stresses, there was still humor. Golan Heights on Israel's northern border, the hostilities had continued, with heavy exchanges both on the ground and in the air. Here too, the Kissinger touch finally worked. Both sides pulled back, leaving a narrow zone to be policed by the United Nations. Hijacking, the scourge of the 1970s, went on. Ambulance men at Tunis airport run forward to collect the body of a murdered victim from a British Airways VC-10. Eventually, the hijackers surrendered. While the slender thread of truce held in the Middle East, the PLO leader Yasser Arafat arrived at the headquarters of the United Nations. He had been invited to address the General Assembly. He was warmly received, except by the American and British delegates and the Israelis, who boycotted the assembly. Outside, he was greeted by pro-Jewish demonstrators. Some of whom left no doubt as to their intentions.
We have people who have been trained and who are out now who intend to make sure that Arafat and his lieutenants do not leave this country alive.
In July, attention was focused on the island of Cyprus as Turkish troops landed to support their countrymen in the north. A peace treaty organized by British Foreign Secretary James Callaghan effectively partitioned the island. In Greece, 7 years of military rule came to an end as the colonels were ousted. Exiled Premier Constantine Karamanlis was recalled, but the monarchy was abolished. In Portugal, too, another dictatorship ended, as Dr. Caetano was overthrown in a military coup by officers opposed to the colonial wars. His successor, General Spinola, was soon elbowed aside by more radical young officers. It was the end of the road, too, for the once proud Lion of Judah. Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia was deposed by a coup of middle-ranking army officers. In Britain, Prime Minister Edward Heath called a February general election to appeal for popular support against striking miners who had put the country on a 3-day week. Many of his cabinet were dubious and the public unconvinced. In a tight finish, the Tories lost their majority, and after attempts to form a coalition, Heath ceded power to a minority Labour government under Harold Wilson. In a second election in October, Wilson was to win a narrow 3-seat majority. Rampant inflation and industrial unrest continued. In Northern Ireland, strikes called by militant unionists crippled the power-sharing government of Brian Faulkner. Direct rule from London had to be imposed, and the Protestants celebrated. Paramilitary displays at a requiem mass in London for an IRA hunger striker caused outrage among British politicians. IRA violence in mainland Britain escalated. The Hare and Hounds pub in Guildford was wrecked by a bomb. 5 people were killed and 65 injured.
A lot of heat. I was thrown from where I was standing. I was thrown through the window of the shop. My jacket on fire, my hair on fire.
Well, my reaction, of course, was one of horror. None of these senseless incidents. Sympathy from everyone concerned in the matter.
Home Secretary Roy Jenkins promised stronger action, but his words were overtaken by events as the violence continued in Northern Ireland, where the Maze prison was set ablaze.
Scotland Yard.
In Birmingham, bombs destroyed 2 city centre pubs, killing 20 and injuring 200. Amid massive public outrage, the government's response was to ban the IRA and give the police sweeping powers of arrest.
I was in the tavern in the town, drinking with a few friends. And, well, I mean, this is when it went off basically without any warning at all.
By the year's end, arrests were being made, but on evidence which later proved to be inadequate. The West End of London reeled under a succession of bomb threats.
Please move up towards the tube station.
Is there more in the area?
Mercifully, not all were genuine.
Will you please clear the footway, move towards the tube station, please?
Suspect bag was found by a member of the staff, examined by security staff, saw it was a bomb and immediately evacuated the section and sealed it off by the fire doors.
Petrol rationing continued in most European countries as the Western nations struggled to cope with the Middle Eastern oil embargo. Even in West Germany, a speed limit had been imposed. But despite the fact that road accidents were reduced by 60%, public outcry soon had it abandoned. In France, a one-day strike was called in protest against rising prices and a low standard of living. Services came to a halt, but there was little response from the private sector. But France would remember 1974 for another reason: the death of a president. Georges Pompidou had been suffering from a mystery illness for some time. After a private funeral in his home village, a memorial service at Notre Dame in Paris was attended by heads of state and government from all over the world. In the elections which followed, there were two main candidates: François Mitterrand, leader of the left-wing coalition, and the independent Republican Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, who rallied the right. Mitterrand promised a more just society and a break with many years of Gaullist rule.
Cela veut dire que vous tous ici, tout au moins dans votre majorité, vous participez pleinement au mouvement populaire qui se déroule 5 mai, 19 mai, ça c'est votre affaire, la réponse vous appartient.
But in the end, Giscard won by a small majority.
Est-ce que vous pouvez me dire de quoi il a été question au cours de cette rencontre ?
Vous allez être un président très jeune. Quel effet cela fait ?
Permettez-moi simplement de vous dire quelque chose. Je suis venu rendre visite à M. Alain Poher, président de la République par intérim, pour examiner avec lui les conditions dans lesquelles seraient proclamés les résultats et ensuite assurer la transmission des pouvoirs.
Symptomatic of the problems facing the new French government was the proposal to withdraw the luxury liner France, pride of the merchant fleet, from service. Competition and rising fuel prices had made her uneconomical to run. On what was to be her final voyage to New York, France was hijacked by her crew. Although the occupation continued for a month, their action achieved nothing. The the popular West German Chancellor Willy Brandt was forced into resignation in spite of rallies and torchlight processions in his support. A close aide, Gunther Guillaume, was found to be an East German spy. Brandt had been warned that Guillaume was under suspicion and accepted responsibility for his failure to act decisively. His successor was to be the defense minister Helmut Schmidt, who became Germany's youngest chancellor at the age of 55. He quickly established an excellent working relationship with his new French opposite number.
Je suis reconnaissant au chancelier de l'Allemagne fédérale de la visite qu'il m'a rendue, de maintenir tout l'acquis, tout ce qui a été construit jusqu'à présent dans la construction européenne et donc stabilité interne des économies.
Ich würde sehr gerne ein oder zwei Sätze dem Herr Präsident Giscard d'Estaing und ich kennen uns seit einigen Jahren, der Gespräche, die wir gehabt haben.
The age-old confrontation of church and state in Italy came to a head over divorce. The church wanted the law allowing civil courts to authorize divorces to be rescinded. A referendum was called to decide whether only the church should have the power to end a marriage. Despite much confusion from the way the question was worded, 59% voted for the existing laws to remain. Neo-fascist terrorists were responsible for an explosion on the Rome to Munich Express. A bomb went off seconds after the train left a tunnel near Bologna. 12 people were killed. Argentina had its first woman president as Isabel Perón took over after the death of her husband. The Cold War continued with a massive Russian naval exercise off the north of Scotland. British air and naval forces showed a close interest. Five of the United States were declared disaster areas after a tornado ripped through homes and farm buildings. More than 300 people died. Billions of dollars of damage resulted. In Australia, Cyclone Wanda was responsible for the worst floods in Queensland for 80 years. Brisbane was inundated. Later in the year, it was Darwin's turn. The capital of the Northern Territory was completely destroyed by Cyclone Tracy. Deputy Prime Minister Jim Cairns went to look at the damage.
The destruction is so complete. There's not a house that's just not torn to pieces. And it has to be seen to be believed.
In northeastern England, a whole community was devastated by a massive explosion in a chemical works at Flixborough on Humberside. The force of the explosion was felt 4 miles away. 29 people were killed and 100 houses destroyed. Disaster of another kind at Ermenonville, outside Paris, as a Turkish Airlines DC-10 exploded, killing 346 passengers. The baggage hold door had been wrongly closed and ripped off, causing the floor of the plane to disintegrate. A new airport was opened for Paris, near the village of Roissy on the northwest of the city. It was to be named Charles de Gaulle, in memory of the great leader. The latest in modern technology had gone into the project, which would cope with 10 million passengers a year. Cars could approach the airport along roads under the runways with no intersections. The joint Anglo-French supersonic airliner Concorde continued its pre-service flights with trips across the Atlantic to various American cities. Thousands turned out to see it arrive at Boston. A representative of the manufacturers took full advantage of the publicity, but Boston's airport chief was to be more cautious.
Our flight time was pretty damn impressive, 3 hours, 9 minutes, and that's really the message that we bring. That's what Concorde's all about. It's what aeroplanes are all about, which is cutting flight times, traveling time down, and that's what we did.
Massport has not taken any official position. So as we said in our press releases, this is a demonstration, informational type flight which we welcome. We will form an opinion as time goes by.
And his reservations were shared by many citizens who linked Concorde with other expensive aviation projects. Even Concorde could not outspeed the SR-71 Blackbird spy plane, which flew from New York to Farnborough in England in less than 2 hours. The US Marine Corps began trials with the British Harrier vertical takeoff fighter. The Royal Navy had already decided to abandon large carriers with fixed-wing aircraft. Meanwhile, in the Arizona desert, the US Air Force was introducing its Aggressor Squadron to teach pilots the lessons of air combat in Vietnam. The squadron was trained to simulate Soviet tactics in exercises against other fighters. The crew of Skylab 3 returned to Earth in triumph after 85 days in space. The flight had proved beyond doubt that man could remain in space for long periods. Following experiments with new independent spacesuits, Marine Lieutenant Colonel Carr made a 4-hour spacewalk. Golden Hind II left London to mark the 400th anniversary of the epic voyage which took Sir Francis Drake to San Francisco. The 13,000-mile voyage lasted 5 months. There was spectacular success for Mexico as the winner of the Whitbread round-the-world yacht race. Sayula II crossed the finishing line with 43 hours to spare over the British Royal Navy's Adventure. The theory they never come back was exploded by the boxing legend Muhammad Ali. In the unlikely setting of Kinshasa in Zaire, Ali took 8 rounds to beat George Foreman and become the world champion again.
I'm telling you these things now because I'm going out of boxing like I came in, predicting against all experts going against all odds, and I'm right. So I'm telling you now, this is my last fight, just like I came into the world when I defeated Sonny Liston, defeating a big puncher couldn't nobody beat. It's befitting that I go out beating the same kind of man. And I tell you all now, I'm still, as I told you 10 years ago when I fought Sonny Liston, I'm still the greatest of all times. You're badly mistaken. I will annihilate this man, and again, I will be right and the world will be wrong. The man has problems.
The disappearance of Lord Lucan, a British aristocrat and well-known gambler, led to a widespread police search. Lucan fled, leaving his nanny dead and his wife injured. Interpol was called in, but despite numerous false sightings all over the world, Lucan was never traced. But some of his friends, like John Aspinall, doubted whether he could have adapted to life as a fugitive.
No, I can't see him as a fugitive. In fact, I know a few people less fitted to be a fugitive than Lord Lucan, because, as I've indicated, he's almost made in a mold. And he's not an adaptive person. So I find it difficult to imagine him in Brazil or in Haiti as a fugitive from justice, because I don't think he has the capacity to adapt.
Many more theories were to be expounded, many more sightings made. But what happened to Lord Lucan remains one of the most intriguing mysteries of the decade. A rather similar mystery unfolded on Miami Beach in Florida, when a British minister, John Stonehouse, was thought to have committed suicide by drowning. His clothes had been found on the beach. Later in the year, Stonehouse was arrested in Australia on charges of having 2 forged passports. Recession came to the French wine trade. In the city of Bordeaux, world-famous producers and suppliers faced a crisis as prices plunged. One firm decided to sell a little more top-quality red wine than it actually possessed. What became known as the Bordeaux wine scandal was exposed. The firm involved was finished in its existing form. But one English shipper felt that not all bad had come out of the affair.
Once the case has been heard, after all, first of all, it was a lot of talk about scandal. Now it's in the hands of the courts, and what will be reported now during the next few days is the facts. And I think probably that after the case, the general public will be very much more aware of the strictness of the controls that we have than they have been up till now. I think the case is going to show that you can't get away with fraud in Bordeaux. And this perhaps will do us good.
Yes, all very nice. Luckily. But then friends would be nice, wouldn't they? Really.
The eyes of the world focused on a budding romance between Richard Burton, recently divorced from Elizabeth Taylor, and Princess Elizabeth of Yugoslavia, a first cousin of Princess Alexandra. The couple were besieged by photographers at the London home of the princess. There was brief speculation, but no marriage resulted.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
1 minute to do it. Right, let's go. Go on, move.
Right.
Sorry, I'm
As chronic recession persisted all over the world, it seemingly failed to make any deep mark on the Paris fashion scene. As one head of a distinguished fashion house said, "We have women here in Paris who would like to buy twice as many clothes as we have available." The Gatsby look, inspired by the Robert Redford film The Great Gatsby, was all the rage. 20s and 30s took over. Style and grace returned. Women, it seems, wanted to be women again. The Soviet Union decided to expel Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the novelist whose books, highly critical of the Soviet system, had won acclaim in the West. The last straw was the publication in Paris of the Gulag Archipelago. Secret police abducted the author from his Moscow flat and put him on a plane for Frankfurt. Solzhenitsyn spent the early days of freedom with an old friend, the German author Heinrich Boll.
We are going to produce a series of 6
Lord Grade launched one of the most expensive television series ever made.
The Life of Jesus. And when you decide to do a production of major significance, it's the quality and the idea of the project that counts, not what is it going to cost. That you face afterwards. We then decided who was the man to direct this. And immediately, one thought came to our mind. Good for humanity. Okay, we'll get Franco Zeffirelli.
I think I like the idea of having some good actors that really like to participate to this work and play some parts in it. And I know I've already had indications that many big talents would like to be with us. So I'm sure we'll find room for appearances of certain valuable personalities which will, contribute to the artistic stature of the project. But I don't think I'll be able to use any of the established actors or actresses in the essential parts, like Christ and his disciples.
Police and public were growing further apart, and the relationship reached its lowest at a pop festival at Windsor, an unauthorized event. About 15,000, mainly young people, were there. As police tried to clear the site in Windsor Great Park, taunting and verbal abuse developed into full-scale fighting. Almost 300 were arrested, 60 of the charges relating to drugs, drink and theft. A further 60 were injured.
We haven't had a national championship at FC this year. I think it would be good if we got one in streaking. I get kind of embarrassed with my clothes off outdoors.
The youth of America reached rock bottom with their latest craze, streaking.
That was really great.
Yeah, what did you think of that?
Great, wish we had more of it.
Why are you guys doing it? Just everybody's doing it now.
It's the new coming thing of our generation.
Well, what if you get busted?
Busted? Now we don't worry about that. With all these people.
Really? Hey, the reason we do it is because we want 500 people to do it tomorrow at 5 o'clock. Oh, really? It's going to get a lot bigger from now on.
They may have managed to get away with it in America, but when it was tried in London at Speaker's Corner, the Bobbies found little to amuse them. And those were some of the memories of the year 1974.
Come on, bloody grow up. Oh, I guess I'm close on before you get these. Get up.